Stella wasn't like most girls her age. At just 19, she carried a quiet wisdom about her, a kind of intelligence that comes from observing the world rather than rushing through it. She lived with her aunt, Mary, in a small, bustling neighborhood of Lagos. Her parents had passed away when she was much younger, leaving her under her aunt's care. Mary was a hard-working woman who owned a modest provisions store in the heart of the city. Stella had been helping her in the shop ever since she could remember, selling soft drinks, bread, and household items to customers who had known her since she was a child. Her life was steady, predictable, and maybe a little boring. But lately, something inside Stella had begun to stir. A longing, a restlessness. As she stood behind the counter every day, watching the busy streets filled with people rushing by, she wondered if this was all there was to life. Was this tiny shop and the familiar faces all she would ever know? Her friends from school had gone on to bigger things. Some had traveled, some were getting married, and a few had started their own businesses. Stella, however, felt stuck. One Saturday morning, after a particularly busy week at the shop, Stella decided she needed something new. Not something drastic, just a small change to shake up the monotony. She had been saving up some money from her part-time job and thought she would treat herself to a new outfit. Lagos was full of vibrant markets, and Balagan Market was one of the busiest. Vendors sold everything from fabrics to shoes, and the air buzzed with the energy of bargaining voices and the smell of roasted corn and fried plantains. As Stella made her way through the crowded stalls, she felt a sense of excitement. It had been a while since she had bought something just for herself. She sifted through racks of brightly colored dresses and blouses, feeling the fabric between her fingers. The sun was high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the market, and for a brief moment, Stella felt lighter, almost carefree. Then her eyes landed on something unusual. Among the piles of clothing tucked in a small corner of a stall was a delicate red silk G-string. It was unlike anything she had ever seen before. Bold, fiery, and seductive, it seemed completely out of place amidst the more modest clothing around it. Stella stared at it, unsure of why it had caught her attention. She had never worn anything so daring before. Her style was usually simple: jeans, t-shirts, and the occasional dress for special occasions. But something about the G-string called to her, as if it was meant for her. The vendor, a middle-aged woman with a knowing smile, noticed Stella's hesitation. "You like it?" she asked, her voice smooth like honey. "It's special. Not many girls can pull it off." Stella blushed, embarrassed to be caught staring at something so intimate. "I don't know," she stammered. "It's a bit much, don't you think?" The vendor shook her head. "No, my dear. It's perfect for someone like you. You've got the fire inside, I can see it. This will bring it out." Stella felt a strange flutter in her chest. Fire inside? She wasn't sure what the woman meant, but she felt drawn to the G-string in a way she couldn't explain. It was cheap, almost too cheap for something so fine. Without thinking too much about it, she handed over the money and quickly shoved the G-string into her bag. It was an impulsive decision, one that made her feel both excited and guilty. On the way home, Stella couldn't stop thinking about her purchase. She knew her Aunt Mary wouldn't approve. Mary was a traditional woman, strict and set in her ways. She believed in modesty and decorum, and Stella had always tried to live up to her expectations. But there was a part of her that longed to break free, to explore a side of herself she had never dared to before. That evening, after helping Mary close up the shop, Stella went to her room and locked the door. She pulled out the G-string and held it up to the light. It was even more beautiful in the soft glow of the lamp, the red silk shimmering like liquid fire. With trembling hands, she undressed and slipped it on. The sensation was immediate, a soft, sensual feeling against her skin that made her feel different, more confident, more daring. As she looked at herself in the mirror, something shifted inside her. It wasn't just the G-string, it was the way she felt wearing it. She stood taller, her shoulders back, her posture more self-assured. For the first time in her life, she felt powerful, like she could take on the world. She smiled at her reflection, liking what she saw. It was a small secret, something no one else would know about, but it made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. The next day, Stella went about her usual routine, but something was different. She noticed the way people looked at her, the way men's eyes lingered just a little too long. Even when she was dressed in her usual jeans and t-shirt, there was an air about her that seemed to draw attention. At first, she thought she was imagining it, but as the days passed, it became more apparent. Men she had known for years, regular customers at her aunt's shop, began to flirt with her in ways they never had before. They complimented her, offered to carry her bags, and one even asked her out on a date. Stella found it flattering at first, enjoying the newfound attention. But as the days turned into weeks, the attention became more intense. Men she didn't know began approaching her on the street, offering her money just to spend time with them. It was strange, almost surreal, and Stella wasn't sure how to react. She had always been shy around men, but now she felt like she had a kind of power over them. They were drawn to her, like moths to a flame, and she wasn't entirely sure why. One evening, her friend Jane invited her to a local club. Jane was outgoing and loved the nightlife, always dragging Stella along even though she wasn't much of a party girl. But that night, something felt different. As they entered the club, Stella felt a surge of confidence. The music pulsed through her, the dim lights casting a seductive glow over the dance floor. For the first time, Stella felt like she belonged in that world, the world of flashing lights, loud music, and intoxicating energy. As she danced, she noticed a man watching her from across the room. He was tall, well-dressed, and exuded wealth and power. His eyes were locked on her, intense and unyielding. After a while, he approached her, his presence commanding the space around them. "Can I buy you a drink?" he asked, his voice smooth and confident. Stella hesitated for a moment, but something inside her urged her to accept. They spent the rest of the night talking, and by the end of the evening he handed her an envelope filled with money. "I'd like to see you again," he said, his eyes gleaming with something dark and alluring. Stella didn't know what to make of it. It wasn't a date, and yet it wasn't just casual either. The envelope felt heavy in her hands, and as she opened it later that night, the sight of the money made her stomach turn. It was more money than she had ever held at once, and yet it felt wrong. Still, she couldn't deny the thrill of it, the idea that someone would pay just to be in her presence. As the weeks went on, more men like the businessman began approaching her. Some offered gifts, others money, and before she knew it, Stella found herself slipping into a world she had never imagined. She wasn't working at the shop as much anymore, and her aunt began to notice her absences. "Where have you been going, Stella?" Mary asked one evening, her eyes filled with concern. "You're never around anymore. I hardly see you." Stella shrugged it off, making excuses about spending time with friends or running errands. But deep down, she knew she was lying, not just to her aunt but to herself. She had become addicted to the attention, to the thrill of living a life that felt dangerous and exciting. The G-string, which she wore every night, had become like a second skin, a symbol of her transformation. One day, Jane, who had noticed Stella's change in behavior, confronted her. "You're not the same, Stella. What's going on with you? You're acting different?" At first, Stella laughed it off, but Jane's words struck a chord. She had been feeling different, almost as if she wasn't herself anymore. The strange pull she had felt since buying the G-string had only grown stronger. She was no longer the quiet girl who worked in her aunt's shop. She was becoming someone else entirely, someone she wasn't sure she liked. Feeling unsettled, Jane decided to investigate. She asked around the market, talking to vendors and locals, trying to find out more about the stall where Stella had bought the G-string. What she discovered shocked her. The G-string had once belonged to a woman named Monique, a famous sex worker who had been known for her beauty and ability to seduce any man she wanted. Monique had lived a life of luxury and excess, her name whispered in the dark corners of the city as if she were a living legend. She had risen from poverty to become one of the wealthiest women in Lagos, but her life had ended tragically. One night, Monique had been found dead in her lavish apartment under mysterious circumstances, and rumors spread that she had been involved in dark, dangerous dealings. Some said she had been cursed by a jealous rival, while others believed she had made a pact with forces beyond this world to maintain her beauty and allure. The more Jane uncovered, the more concerned she became. The G-string Stella had bought was said to be one of Monique's personal belongings, and it was rumored to be cursed. Monique's seductive power and tragic fate had somehow been transferred to her clothing, and anyone who wore it would begin to experience the same uncontrollable desires and cravings that had consumed Monique's life. It was as though Monique's spirit lived on, influencing anyone who dared to wear her intimate items, drawing them into the same destructive path she had walked. Jane knew she had to warn Stella, but she also knew her friend wouldn't believe her without proof. She decided to confront the woman who had sold the G-string in the market. When she returned to the stall, the vendor's smile faded the moment Jane mentioned Stella's name and the red silk G-string. The vendor looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting nervously around the market as if she feared being overheard. "I didn't know she would come for it," the vendor muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Come for what?" Jane pressed, her heart pounding in her chest. "The G-string, it's cursed. I shouldn't have sold it, but she seemed so drawn to it, like it was meant for her. I've only had it for a short time. A man brought it to me, said it had belonged to Monique. He needed money, and I didn't think much of it at the time. But I've heard the stories, and now I see that the curse is real." Jane felt a cold chill run down her spine. "What kind of curse?" The vendor's eyes were wide with fear. Monique was no ordinary woman. She dabbled in things, dark things. She wanted eternal beauty, eternal youth, and she got it, but at a cost. The curse passed to her clothes when she died, especially the ones closest to her body. Anyone who wears them becomes like her, consumed by lust and greed, unable to control their desires. They're drawn into a life they can't escape, a life that destroys them from the inside out. Jane's mind raced as she pieced everything together. Stella's sudden change in behavior, the way men had been flocking to her, the money, the gifts, it all made sense now. The G-string had taken hold of her, just as it had taken hold of Monique. Jane knew she had to act quickly before it was too late. That night, Jane rushed to Stella's apartment, determined to help her friend. She found Stella sitting on the edge of her bed, surrounded by expensive gifts and wads of cash, her eyes hollow and distant. The vibrant, curious girl Jane had once known was gone, replaced by someone who looked lost, as though trapped in a world she didn't understand. "Stella, you need to listen to me," Jane said, her voice shaking with urgency. "That G-string you bought, it's cursed. It belonged to Monique, the famous sex worker, and it's changing you. It's drawing you into a life that's not yours. Please guys subscribe to my channel." Stella looked up at her, her expression blank at first. But as Jane continued to explain what she had learned, a flicker of fear crossed Stella's face. She stood up and walked over to the mirror, staring at her reflection, her fingers brushing against the red silk beneath her clothes. "I thought I was in control," Stella whispered, her voice barely audible. "But it's like something's inside me, pushing me to do things I never would have done before. I can't stop it." Jane grabbed her friend's hands, her grip firm. "We can stop it. We have to get rid of the G-string. You have to let it go, Stella." Tears welled up in Stella's eyes as she realized how far she had fallen. She had been so swept up in the allure of the attention, the money, and the power that she hadn't noticed how much of herself she had lost along the way. Now, standing in front of the mirror, she barely recognized the person looking back at her. "I don't know who I am anymore," Stella said, her voice trembling. "You're still you," Jane reassured her. "But we need to break this curse before it takes you any further." Together, Jane and Stella gathered the G-string and other gifts that had come into her life since wearing it. Jane knew of a local spiritual healer named Agnes who was rumored to have knowledge of such curses. The two friends hurried to Agnes's small, unassuming home on the outskirts of the city. Agnes was an older woman, her face etched with the wisdom of years, her eyes sharp and discerning. She listened carefully as Jane explained everything, nodding as though she had heard stories like this before. "You've been touched by Monique's spirit," Agnes said, her voice calm but firm. "Her desires, her obsessions, they live on through that G-string. It has woven itself into your life, feeding on your insecurities and drawing out your deepest cravings. But it can be removed." Stella's hands trembled as she handed the G-string to Agnes, who laid it on the table in front of her. The healer began to prepare for a ritual, lighting candles and chanting softly under her breath. The room filled with the smell of burning herbs, and a strange energy seemed to settle over them. Agnes worked methodically, her movements precise and deliberate as she broke the connection between Stella and the cursed garment. As the ritual progressed, Stella felt a weight lifting from her chest, as though an invisible force had been holding her down for weeks. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time in months, she felt like herself again. When Agnes finished, she turned to Stella with a warning. The G-string may be gone, but the desires it awakened are still inside you. You must confront them, or they will continue to control your life. This was not just Monique's curse, it was your own inner longing that allowed it to take root. Stella nodded, understanding the truth in Agnes's words. The G-string had only amplified what had already been there, the restlessness, the yearning for something more, the desire to escape the life she had known. But now she realized that those desires could be dangerous if left unchecked. As they left Agnes's home, Stella felt lighter, freer, but she knew the journey to reclaiming her life was only beginning. She returned to her aunt's shop, determined to start over. She cut ties with the men who had been paying for her attention, rejecting the gifts and the money that had once thrilled her. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when she missed the excitement, the rush of being desired, but she knew it wasn't worth losing herself over. Over time, Stella enrolled in night classes, determined to build a future for herself that wasn't based on anyone else's desires but her own. She found solace in the simplicity of her old life, in the routine of helping her aunt in the shop and studying to become a lawyer. She wanted to help others, especially young women like herself, who might find themselves drawn into the same dangerous allure that had almost consumed her. Jane remained by her side, a constant source of support and friendship. Together, they looked back on those dark months with a sense of relief that they had escaped a fate much worse. Stella never forgot the lesson she had learned, that true power and confidence come from within, not from the attention or approval of others. The G-string was gone, but its legacy remained, a reminder of how easy it is to lose yourself when you let your desires take control. Stella had faced the darkness within her, and she had emerged stronger, more self-assured, and more determined to build a life that truly belonged to her. In the end, Stella's story became one of redemption, a journey from temptation and illusion back to self-discovery and strength. She had been drawn into a world she didn't understand, but she had found her way out, with the help of a true friend and the courage to confront her own inner demons. And though the G-string was just a piece of cloth, it had revealed something far deeper about the nature of desire, power, and the choices we make in shaping our own destinies. Let me know in the comment what you think about this amazing story. Do well to subscribe to my channel so that whenever I upload a new story, you will be the first to be notified. Stay safe.